State Community College and serves as the Community College co-chair of the Faculty Advisory Committee to the CT Board of Regents for Higher Education.
So, hi everyone. I'd say my relationship to the book is that we in Connecticut have undergone the last 6 years of a complete restructure of our community colleges, going from 12 independently accredited institutions to a single one with a centralized administration. And most of it was justified and fueled by this completion agenda and these different think tanks and edu-philanthropies that Robin describes in the book. So, I mean, when it came to us, it was kind of like this, someone's saying it. Someone has summed it all up. It is very much an analysis and a story of what we have been undergoing, and as we have been looking for allies as we go through this, we're discovering that it's happening all over the country. So, you know, it has been a sort of analysis that in Connecticut we reach to quite a bit and are trying to share. And I'll stop there because, yeah, I can go on.
You will be able to momentarily. Wendy Brill-Wynkoop is the president of the Faculty Association of California Community Colleges, also known as FACT, where she tirelessly advocates for the rights and interests of more than 50,000 faculty members throughout the state of California. She has over 3 decades of experience in higher education, and she's made significant contributions as a photography and digital media professor at the College of the Canyons since 1997. Wendy's dedication to serving the community college system extends far beyond the classroom, as she's held influential leadership roles within her union and faculty senate and continues to play a vital role in shaping policies that promote equity for both faculty and students in California.
Thank you. So I'm president of the Faculty Association in California Community Colleges. It sounds like a union, but we're actually much earlier than the unions. We've been around for over 70 years. And it's an advocacy and professional organization for faculty. And the space that we are in is almost completely statewide policy. And I knew something was wrong in California, like my panelists, like things were changing dramatically before our eyes. And I started working with FAC, and I had no idea that it was such an organized agenda behind what was happening, but sort of figured that out working in the policy space, which I've been doing for about 10 years now. And I think when I read your book, I felt like I wasn't a conspiracy nut. That's sort of my relationship to it, is like, oh my gosh, I'm right. You know, so that I felt like a lot of times I was making these arguments and people were thinking I was completely crazy, and there's so much great data in there, and I just absolutely love it. And then we at FAC, we are very fortunate to have Robin come out 2-3 weeks ago, I guess about 3 weeks ago, to our statewide advocacy and policy conference, and she was our keynote, and we felt very fortunate to have you with us.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in. We're going to start with Colena, who's going to discuss chapter 2 of the book, and this is really about austerity and edu-philanthropy.
So I think I'll begin by sort of just summarizing the content of the chapter, expanding on it with a case study of how this has affected Connecticut, and then sort of in the spirit of this conference, offering maybe a little bit of what we have used as a pushback in terms of a union response through the framework of bargaining for the common good, which is, you know, as was mentioned, it is an organized, national, long-term sort of push that we are facing, and it requires a sort of mass-scale, organized pushback. So I want to do that, and then maybe offer an opportunity to respond or expand on that. So in chapter 2 is about the ways that colleges, the transformation of how colleges have come to be evaluated concerning student success. And in recent years, the definition of what success means for a college and for a student has been very much shaped by a number of think tanks and these edu-philanthropies that are a little bit different in their structure from the sort of more traditional philanthropy. So you have the old school, Annenberg, Carnegie, Ford, Wallace, Joyce, etc., who would give their money to the institution itself and have them further their kind of initiatives. These days we have Gates, Dell, Walton, Fisher, Robertson, Broad, creating these think tanks, these policy groups that impose their own sort of idea of what success is and different initiatives, and sort of fund piecemeal the extent to which institutions conform to these aims. And one of these sort of overriding pushes has been towards a completion agenda. Now, it's not totally misplaced. The vast majority of students who enter community college say that they want to complete a bachelor's degree. They value education. They also realize how essential it is for survival these days in the workforce. So there is a huge discrepancy between the number of students who self-report a desire to finish a bachelor's degree and those who in fact do even complete at the associate's level or certificate level. That does exist. And yet the entire focus on getting students out the door with some sort of credential has bypassed our ability to look at what it actually means to educate them, what it actually means to give them something of value. So there are these three neoliberal logics that Robin describes as sort of undergirding this push. And the first is an austerity ideology. And in this austerity ideology, I would say that one of the ways that we can describe what these eduphilanthropies is doing is a sort of individualized focus on how we can get students to cope with the effects of an austerity approach to our institutions without, in fact, critiquing the austerity itself. So these are, approaches that look at, student grit, about eliminating developmental or reducing developmental education so that students get through the process more quickly, taking more credits so that they, again, right, momentum seems to lead to success. So because there is a statistical relationship between people who are able to take a full-time or more course load and completion, that is promoted. But never is it considered what it is about the institution itself, the ways that they can meet the needs of the students, as opposed to transforming community college students who are mostly non-traditional students into something that looks more like a traditional student, right? So this austerity ideology focuses on how an individual can buck up under these institutions that are being drained of their resources over time, without focusing on what it is about the institution itself that really should be changing in terms of that more structural view. So in the completion agenda, again, is just about getting students to where they report they want to be. Nothing wrong with that, of course, except the framework with which it is implemented. And then there's this accountability regime. And the accountability is that increasingly the institutions, students, faculty are judged by the extent to which they meet the metrics that we are looking for, which is it's all about enrollment and retention. Now, it's all about enrollment and retention because the survival of these colleges requires it. As state funding has been dwindling, more and more we rely on tuition dollars to get through. The more we strain students with the burden of funding the institution, the longer and longer it actually does take students to get through the process. So we're seeing in recent years the time to completion has been increasing and increasing. Not because we haven't sufficiently motivated students to take 15 credits to finish, as is the Complete College America ideal, not because we haven't sufficiently done invasive advising, as is the Guided Pathways sort of framework, not because we have allowed students to kind of wander away while they take developmental courses because their underfunded K-12 systems have left them years and years behind, right? But because for our students at the community colleges who tend to be working, they tend to be at least partially supporting families, caretaking, commuting, they're not residential students, the burdens of outside life, right, get in the way. There's not enough time in the day, there's not enough money as the cost of housing increases, as health care becomes less and less available, as childcare gets more expensive. These are the challenges that students face, and they are in fact slipping further and further behind. But dealing with those things is not the focus of these think tanks and edu-philanthropies. So while the focus is clearly correct, students want to complete, we should help them complete. The methodology has been very individual focused about students coping under austerity without any critique of austerity itself, right? And the money that has gone into this has been enormous. Just the two of the largest donors in a 2015 analysis, I think the Mellon Foundation gave $81 million, Bill and Melinda Gates $75 million. When you have institutions, again, that are just drained of resources, complying with standards of success that give you any sort of outside grant money, it's almost a coercive relationship. And we see these colleges turning themselves inside out to meet these metrics, whether or not they like them, right? So the other aspect of this is that, so there's an inadequate focus on what the challenges that our students actually are facing, right? What are those actual challenges and how can we address them? And part of this is probably because there is an inadequate level of participation from people who actually have any kind of experience at community colleges or even in public education at all, right? A lot of these are elite institutions run by folks who have gone to elite institutions. You know, the Community College Resource Center is at Columbia University, which is itself an elite institution, and most of the people who staff it are not community college folks. It's wonderful that they are working on this and focusing on this, but when you start to see the difference, the huge discrepancy between what we face and what's being addressed, it begins to get concerning. So, I mean, the way that I usually frame this is as a sort of elite capture, in a sense, because we're talking about public institutions, right, community colleges, but the agenda, the framework, the standards of success, what that institution is increasingly being shaped by private interests. Private interests that will eventually be our students' employers. And they are, in some sense, whether purposefully or not purposefully, building a precarious and exploitable workforce because of the failures that we are seeing on the ground. I, tend to be in that camp of feeling like conspiracy theorist, but I think it's irrelevant what the intentions are. The fact is that is what the effects have been over these few years. It's concerning, and we have to intervene. So, in Connecticut, what we have seen is exactly what is described, this completion agenda coupled with an austerity sort of framework. The decision to consolidate 12 colleges into one in 2017 was made in the middle of a state budgetary standoff. And there were two solutions offered: a consolidation of the community colleges that was going to save money, and something called a set of fiscal guardrails that make it impossible for us to spend all of our to spend past a certain point. We are at the moment at a point where we have an illegally overflowing rainy day fund in the billions. We have, we do not have a revenue problem. We have loads of money, but we are not allowed to spend it, because in 2017 we imagined up a thing called a bond lock that no one's tested the legality of yet, that says that the state cannot spend past a certain amount ever. Everything else has to go to pension liabilities, and that promise was made to Wall Street, and we have exposed ourselves to lawsuits should we spend beyond it. So right now we have any number of state services that are sorely underfunded. Working people are suffering. We have the money, we cannot spend it because we promised not to, right? So here is where we are. And then the decision to save money on the community colleges is outrageous when you consider that Connecticut is a state that has suffered with segregated K-12 systems, that they continue to be segregated. They pour any amount of money, and we cannot seem to get them unsegregated. We understand we have more school districts than towns in our in our state in order to sort of jerry-rig this in this way. So if there should be anything that the state should be doing or investing in, it should be in working class folks who have been historically disinvested, whose communities have been suffered historic disinvestment, and instead that is not what we found. The narratives to justify this consolidation has all been about a completion agenda. Your graduation rates are down, people are getting stuck in developmental ed, we have to fix it, we have to fix it. Lots of guilt and shame heaped upon faculty about how we have been failing students, especially Black and brown students. The whole thing was framed in equity and anti-racism narrative that made literally no sense, because we were defunding institutions that served people of color and poorer and working people. So what ended up happening was that we opened this new institution that was advertised as being built for Black and Latinx students with a $130 million deficit. We opened a defunded institution for these students and called it equity, right? So this is where we are. And the entire structure, the way we were supposed to save money, was by simply eliminating developmental ed, getting everyone into a college course in the first semester, by just a whole suite, 15 to finish, encouraging people to take 15 credits in their first semester, guided pathways that we never actually implemented. And what I want to suggest is that we suffered a doubled effect, because I think that a lot of these think tanks, what they offer seems so, it seems to promise so much that we overshoot. So what happened in Connecticut was that not only did we try to implement all of these things, it was a sort of desperation to pretend we could implement all of these things, hoping that on the back end we'd get the grant money to make up the stuff that we didn't actually do. So there is the sort of poor focus of the research and the recommendations, but then there is, in defunded institutions, this desperation that then leads to a misuse of the research in a desperate attempt to cover what are truly harmful reforms and advertise them as beneficial because, well, administrators must. And we don't want to further tank our enrollment, right? So we have seen this doubled and tripled, and I'll just very quickly say that our response has been one that has involved a coalition of, through bargaining, sort of bargaining for the common good model, where we have 70 different orgs, unions, and faith groups, where we have been working together to address not just higher ed funding, but unemployment insurance for striking workers, predictable scheduling, housing, and introducing a renters union, elimination of the sub-minimum wage, expanding access to childcare to healthcare for undocumented workers, K through 12, childcare, because those are the things. It's about the state budget and the larger support for working class folks that is really going to make it possible for our community college students to actually survive in our classes, not just grit and taking more credits. So that has been our sort of labor-centered organization, pushback in the other direction. And that's it for me. Thank you. There's a hand, but that's till
Well,
after.
we're gonna let Robin sort of respond, and then we'll open it up to the audience. So,
Thank you for being here late in the afternoon. Thank you for that. It is pretty amazing to have one's thoughts and ideas kind of coalesce and then actually have things on the ground happening that mirror what I was finding, what I was suspecting, what I was theorizing, and what I found. I mean, to the detriment, of course, of us and our students, but it's validating in the sense that my thinking was on target. And you know, it's the book was written to try to respond to some of these contradictions that were just laying there in the air that nobody was really addressing, right? I mean, the first of which was, as we democratized higher ed, was around the same time as we saw the shrinking of our public sector budgets around higher education, making it more difficult for people to go to school and advance their education. And then, of course, the whole completion agenda is one that is modeled off of a full-time student, which is completely antithetical to the way most community college students go to school. And to see the outcomes of this thinking, the narrowness of our definitions of success, the narrowness of the research or the reading of the research, and we see now, in the case of Connecticut and California, the real impact of what is driving these changes. I love the term of elite capture. I think it's really helpful here. You know, I'm excited by the fact that what I've written here has resonated so much in different communities, but all related to the community college. So I've been speaking with faculty groups, to faculty associations, to unions, to staff, because we have to remember that we work in tandem with our staff folk, our HEOs who populate our offices, who are also kind of in this struggle together. And you know, I think this model of bargaining for the common good, maybe we need to create a national movement towards that in each of our respective states to really reconsider how we go about bargaining and who we should be partnering with, and to try to really turn the tide. Because I don't think it's too late, but it is often it does seem insurmountable. And so thank you for drawing not only out some of the important aspects of Chapter 2, but to linking it to the very real conditions that are happening right now in Connecticut.
Tim?
Yeah, yesterday at the opening panel, this figure was tossed about several times about completion rates for four-year schools. It was like 50 to 60%. Do we have national data? And I know it's a totally different animal for community colleges, but is there any national data about how two-year schools compare?
It's much worse, but you know, it's also a problem with the metric, right? Who are we including in that data? So, you know, some of the national data sets only include full-time students, so that leaves out the vast majority of our students. Some of them only scale it to 3 years, which those of us in the community college sector know that that's not a plausible time limit to be thinking about completion rates. So there's attempts at increasing the time frame to 6, even 8 years. There is to include both full-time, part-time, and our credential students, the students who are just going for certificates. And that has better rates, but that, you know, therein lies some of our problem, is that how we measure these things is really instrumental in how we go about responding to them. And so even if we know something, knowing that number is tricky because of how did we derive at that number. And part of what folks like the Gates Foundation and the Lumina Foundation, they don't really care so much about defining the metrics better. I mean, we know this from the work that they tried to do in K through 12, which was summarily rejected, but had a lot of impact. So it is worse, but we also, you know, there are lots of reasons why people go to community college, and that's another thing. We're a multi-mission institution, And we serve a lot of different kinds of educational needs and professional needs. And it's really hard in that way to even compare to a more traditional four-year or bachelor granting institution.
To give you a number, right, so nationally it's like 33 to 35%, but that includes a lot of community colleges that are vocational, so they're short-term certifications rather than degree programs. So it's actually in CUNY, where we don't have that as much, it's mid to upper 20s. So for our school, it's 28% is the 3-year graduation, and it's first time, and it's also it's the first time full time. So so many of our students come in as transfer students from a senior college too, so they're not getting
And I
counted.
imagine transfer wouldn't necessarily be captured by completion, because sometimes
Correct.
students don't get the local degrees, they just go from.
Right.
It's a separate number,
Yeah,
so when you
it's a
include
separate.
that, our numbers then go up into the 40%.
But most of the national data do not capture
Yeah.
that, which gives the impression that the completion rates are a lot worse and a lot more urgent than they are.
And I see another question, one more question,
It
but
was
I
just
wanted
a comment
to,
related to that.
and I wanted to comment to another thing that I think of when you talk about the narrowing of our mission and how community college serves so many different needs. I mean, we've really taken a lot of the community out of community colleges. The lifelong learning is gone. You lost your job, and so you're gonna go back in to get some additional, support and resources and training. We've had to cut all of that because of the austerity model, where we're just so driven into this place of it's only the courses people need for these, particular pathways to get them out. It's really decimated our schools.
Well, I was just going to say something similar, which is that the completion data doesn't include all those students who come and take a class for reasons that have nothing to do with getting a degree, getting a certificate, transferring. We have a lot of, in the community colleges, we have a lot of returning students or second or third career students or retirees who are like, oh, I'd like to take a glass blowing class. And so they're not going to go get a job as a glass blower, but they want to take the coursework. And they don't count because they don't necessarily, complete anything. But they're still a valuable part of our campus community, and we're still providing a service for them. But when we're only focused on numbers and metrics, then we lose that focus that we really were designed to have.
And so I think that's a great segue into Wendy, who's going to talk about chapter 4 and the narrowing definitions of success and what we call success.
Yeah, and I'm going to try and keep my thoughts narrow because I could talk about this book forever. So
I'll set a timer for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So chapter 4, challenging narrow definitions of success. So in this chapter, Robin argues for a more nuanced understanding of student success and persistence, considering the complex and often difficult circumstances that our community college students face. It calls for reevaluating educational policies and practices to better serve the needs of our students, to uphold the social justice mission of the community colleges. Sorry, forgot I'm not in California. She adopts the term precarious to describe community college students' social, economic, and academic vulnerabilities, and spends a lot of time sharing personal stories about students and what students have communicated to her about their lives, which I think is one of my favorite parts of the book. Is it's not just data. There's a lot of data, by the way, Tim, if you want all the completion numbers, there's a whole chunk in there about all different completion numbers. But the personal stories, and in the California community colleges, the vast majority of our students are 25 years and older. They're caring for dependents. They work at least 30 hours a week or more. The vast majority of our students, I think it was 65% in the most recent survey, have struggled with housing insecurity. And so we have students, like, precarious is such, it's just, I've always tried to think about how to describe them, and precarious is perfect. Like, they're just walking this tightrope of being able to exist. And the fact that they keep showing up to me just brings tears to my eyes. Because when I hear from policymakers that students aren't serious, I'm like, you haven't met my students. They're clawing through their lives to get their education, right? Just here by the grace of God, and how dare you say that they're not serious? Because they know that this is the way to a better life. So what you end up talking about is this student sensibility. Then the concept of the student sensibility is introduced to help educators, administrators, and policymakers better understand the needs and realities of our community college students. And this chapter emphasizes the need for institutional responses that go beyond traditional neoliberal constructs of student success. So in this chapter, you don't particularly talk about remediation reform, but I do want to talk about that from the California community colleges because it's something that we have been struggling with quite a bit and has really instigated, to me, an insane austerity measure. I feel like those of us in the California community colleges, I feel like we're in like an alternate reality, and I'm hoping that somehow we'll come back to reality. But I do understand that we're all in different states, but every one of us has been touched by these measures, and it's going to look a little different. But I think in reading Robin's book twice now, I think it's important to see what is happening in other states, because if it hasn't come to you, it's going to. And if you've solved it, we need to know, right? So just a little bit about the California community colleges. We're the largest system of education in the United States, period, even bigger than any K-12. We had 2.8 million students in 2008. We're down to 1.9 million. Guess why? Because of austerity measures. We are 70% of the classes are taught by contingent faculty. And we offer many programs: lifelong learning, associate degree for transfer. Those are two different things. One is a standard degree for transfer. Certificates, and we now, as of fall 2024, are mandated by the legislature to place every single student on the associate degree for transfer pathway, regardless if they're coming for whatever reason. And that will be done through technology, through our application system. Students can opt out, but we don't even know how they'll be able to do that. We have 73 districts that each have a locally elected board of trustees and that oversee the governance of the colleges. And then we have a chancellor's office that has a board of governors that writes regulation. So I point that out because there was a push for us to be one system. They're still pushing for us to be one system, probably because we're 73 instead of 12. You said 12, right? Mm-hmm. They didn't quite get to making us one system, but they very much would like us to be one system because it would be a lot easier to roll over us. We have a foundation. Our California Community Colleges Foundation, which I think is important to point out, had an annual budget of $15 million back in 2016. Just a month ago, they reported out to the Board of Governors, and it's a $175 million annual budget. $175 million annual budget for the foundation. We have almost no idea where the money's coming from or what the heck they're doing with the money. And I happened to run into somebody who works for the foundation. There's 575 people that work for the California Community College Foundation. So I'm not quite sure what they do, but I can tell you a lot of this policy work is actually coming from within the California Community College Foundation. So we have this legislature and system office that's supposed to be service-based, and then this foundation that's driving a lot of the policy reform. I want to share sort of my aha moment, and then I will get back to remediation. A lot of the California community colleges changed in 2017 when we got a new chancellor. His name is Eloy Oakley. He stepped down in 2022, so from 2017 to 2022, he was our chancellor, and he grew the foundation and brought in this huge influence of these same groups, the Lumina, Gates Foundation. He, within months of arriving, wrote a new vision for success. It was the system goals, all the metrics that we had to, all the 116 colleges, 73 districts had to reach. And it was written by the Lumina Foundation. It wasn't written by our consultation process. I sit on consultation council for the state. All of our system partners sit on a consultation board. It bypassed the consultation process completely. It was written and done and sort of delivered. This is our new system goals, and it was all about completion and persistence. It sort of really captured a lot of the direction that we ended up going. But my aha moment was, and I had already started doing policy work statewide, and I already realized that something weird was happening. I was at the FAC Advocacy and Policy Conference, our annual conference, the one that you just spoke at in 2017, and I was just an audience member. And we asked our new chancellor, Eli Oakley, to come speak to the students and the faculty. And he talked all about student success for about an hour, and then we had a Q&A. So members of the audience were standing up and asking questions, and one of the first people that stood up was a student. And she said, I have a question for you, Chancellor Oakley. And he said, okay. And she said, I was in an abusive relationship for most of my adult life, and this man almost killed me more than once. And I took a class at a community college, and I found belonging. I found a community. I found people that got me out of this relationship. I literally have goosebumps thinking about this because I remember the student. And she said, and I got away from this guy, and I'm probably alive to this day because of that one class. Mm-hmm. And she said, I never graduated, I never completed, I don't even think I finished the class. And she said to him, am I a success? And he said, no. Oh. And I was like, we're not in this. We're not in this vision for success to improve students' lives. We're in this for checking a box, just getting it done, which is what Robin uses a lot in her book. And so that was my aha moment that I'm like, okay, we got to do something about this. And I started like going all into the policy work. So remediation reform, which is some of my co-panelists asked me to address. In California, just sort of an FYI, we have very low or no tuition. We actually, if you could walk into any community college before 2018 and say, I have no money, and you could sign this BOG, it was called the BOG waiver, Board of Governors waiver, and they would let you take classes for free. It's not that way anymore. We had, I think it was 2017 or 18, we had a bill passed that you had to take 12 units or more and then it was free, but it's only free for 2 years, and it's only free for those who come right out of high school. So we changed even our tuition, but still it's relatively low compared to other community colleges. Even if you do have to pay, it's about $50 a unit. So it's still pretty low. But in 2012, at the height of sort of that 2.8 million students, we had a piece of legislation passed. Lowenthal was the author. Now he's in Congress. He was an assembly member at the time. And it was called the Student Success Act. And it required that the minute a student sets foot on campus, we have to do orientation, we have to assess them, and we have to create a matriculation plan the moment they set foot on campus. Now, when you have 20,000 students show up on day one, how are you supposed to do that? Well, we were told it was going to be high tech and high touch. High tech and high touch. Well, high tech showed up. High touch did not. We didn't get any more money for advisors or to help with anything. So what we ended up doing is making it easier for those white middle-class students, the students with maybe a sensibility that they knew how to go to college or they knew how to navigate the system. Getting back to chapter 4, many of our students that you're addressing in this chapter and their approach to college, they just don't know what a matriculation plan is or what an assessment is. And so they would show up to be assessed in a moment. You know, they show up on day one, they're excited about what classes to take, and they're put into a math and English assessment. And what happened is an unintended consequence of this legislation is we had to throw them all into AccuPlacer, which is, you know, a system that placed everybody very low in their remediation scale. So we had students taking, 5 or 6 classes to try and get into college, right? They took them on our college campus, but they didn't count for anything. So what did faculty do? Oh, we got to fix this. So even at my college, at College of the Canyons, we created an open math lab, an open English lab. So instead of all these series of classes, you'd go into this lab and you'd work on that until you could pass out, and then boom. So a semester, if you worked on it, you could get out of remediation. My own husband, when he decided to go back to college, did that. And so given some of those successes, faculty got behind a piece of legislation in 2017 called AB 705. And this piece of legislation, you can go back and read it, it says that the colleges have to have a 1-year pathway to get students through transfer level math and English. It doesn't specify what the pathway looks like, so it could be one of these open remediation labs and then the transfer course. Unfortunately, that got hijacked by these reform groups. 2017, same time Eli Oakley came in. So after a piece of legislation is passed, the system then writes Title V regulation, which gives us how we're going to implement this. And the implementation, Title V regulations got very, very narrow. And essentially, they place students directly into transfer with just a few caveats, right? So that it went from, okay, colleges, we need to do a better job getting students remediated, to throw everybody into transfer, sink or swim. And many colleges sort of just ignored that requirement, or they came up with some other possibilities like statistics pathway and liberal arts pathway, which was usually a student was able to do that in 1 semester if they weren't a STEM student. But what happened is the reformers were still on us, the data was still coming out, they're completely embedded in the chancellor's office, right? We have this enormous growing foundation. And then in addition to that, in 2018, we get a new funding formula that has performance-based metrics that incentivize the colleges to put everybody directly into transfer level math and English, because if they complete it in 1 year, then the colleges get a bonus, right? So put them in, get them through. So then we end up with, in 2022, a following piece of legislation, which was called AB 1705, same author, that puts everybody into transfer level math and English, period. Because we're open access, we can't have any other options. If we have any other option at the campus, then the student could have choice or agency to take another option. So we're not even legally allowed now to offer anything but transfer level math and English. You can offer it in other areas, but not math and English. So if you're, say, a contractor and you need some trigonometry, you have to take the trigonometry transfer level course. We can't even offer a non-credit remediation. Summer bridge programs are gone. All of that's gone. You go into transfer level. Okay, timing, I see. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention is that, now I forgot what. Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead. What's important about this is that, getting back to the chapter, is that, and I think you use it in a different chapter, but the regime of truth, this whole idea, they sold this whole idea that somehow the districts were falsely putting students in lower level classes, and the only way to remedy this was to remove all student agency and choice, that they didn't have the ability to choose where they should go. If we gave them choice, then the faculty would force students into this remedial plan, and that they have to go directly into transfer level math and English. The reform groups paid students to testify, and they convinced the students that it was an equity issue, and there was all this false equity language that this bill AB 1705 was wrapped up in. It made me feel again like we were on some alternate reality. When I came back to your book and I read through it, and actually I read your book before AB 1705, but this idea that that they're really going to sell a lie, and they're going to sell it so well, I thought that really made me feel like, okay, I'm not crazy. They really are trying to, and we talked about this a little bit on Zoom when we were planning. I feel that Lumina is about student loans. That's how they made their money. They want everybody on the transfer pathway so that they can sell more loans. They also pal up with ECMC, which is student loan debt collection. Gates is into anything tech, and now he's opening up tutoring centers all over California, math tutoring centers. So I feel that there's more to this than the completion agenda.
The Walmart Corporation also.
Oh, thank you. Walmart, which was Ed Trust West in California, was very much behind 1705, and if you can't pass through transfer level math and English, and you can't get a college degree, where do you go? You have your cheap labor, and you go work for Walmart. So I feel that there's very much more behind this in terms of making sure we have a cheap labor force. It's not about necessarily completion numbers. And I'm sure I have a lot more, but I'm going to stop there. I'm sorry, Robin.
Not at all.
I said I could talk forever. I warned you guys.
Not at all. This is so tricky to respond because there's so many different pieces. I mean, part of what I wanted to do in the book was to try to sew together some of the strands that seem very disconnected. So it kind of a bridge between chapters 2 and 4, right? So I do talk a lot about the new role of these edu-philanthropies, the Gates Foundation, the Lumina Foundation, and to be quite honest, some of the data that I use in the book was from a project that I was involved with, which was a Gates-funded project, testing academic momentum on first-year community college students throughout CUNY. They were randomized controlled trial experiments where we would, compare the outcomes of the students in the program that we incentivized with Gates money. We gave $1,000 to students, right? And it was a failure. Like the RCTs failed. Like it did not show any kind of improvement by increasing their momentum. And we tested 3 different things. We tested students who started out as part-time students in their first semester, incentivized them to become full-time in their second, and compared them with a control group. The second was those students who took a free summer bridge program prior to starting, the students who needed remediation, who enrolled in a bridge program. And then the third was students after their first year, if they took a summer class, a credit-bearing summer class. Now, we were particularly interested in what, at the time, the team was calling a reluctant student. And they defined reluctant as students who, on their own, didn't sign up for these kinds of initiatives. Because we have a problem of selection bias, right? When we evaluate these programs, it's the students who tend to go for them on their own. So we were really curious in tapping into those students who didn't show an interest, right? But from the get-go, our definitions were problematic, right? Reluctance didn't really mean reluctance in the sense that the project folks thought, and I was brought on the team because of my community college cred. It was a group of graduate students and a professor at in the sociology department, actually a former mentor of mine, who studied community colleges, but in all honesty, didn't know a whole lot about the community college context. And I think he knew that, and so he brought me in. And this was my first experience. I will say the Gates Foundation, they were pretty hands-off, right? They were rigid about getting their yearly reports, but other than that, they were not all that intrusive. However, they dominate what is being researched and how. So what Wendy is describing is a mirror of the guided pathways, which the Gates Foundation has essentially brought to community colleges through the partially funded Community College Research Center housed at Columbia, okay? And then not only that, but then it gets evaluated by the so-called independent evaluation, the MDRC, which is also partially funded by the Gates Foundation. So it's this kind of echo chamber of same folks, same messaging, same objectives. And so this was sort of some of the other impulse of writing this book. I do talk a little bit about remediation. I don't deal with it head on, but I'll just share some of what happened in CUNY to mirror some of these timelines. So after quite a number of years, so I was on this project from 2011 to 2013. It failed miserably. There were no, glossy, look at what happened. It was kind of shoved under the rug. However, in CUNY, they adopted this academic momentum kind of push. So in 2017, there was a CUNY master plan or strategic plan. I can't remember what it was called. And they were talking about the students who were at 12 credits, which was what they needed to become eligible for financial aid, right? That's what made them full-time. But there was a problem with their course-taking culture. Because if you do the math, if you're at 12 credits per semester, you're not going to finish at 12 in 2 years, right? So we have a math problem, right? And we have a completion problem. So there was initiatives at several of our CUNY campuses, one of which was popular was for students doing their own registration through the software management tools that we've also paid money for. They'd get a pop-up message if they were at 12 credits, and it would say, do you know that with no extra cost, you can take an additional 3-credit class? End of message, that's it. And so some students are like, wow. So they see the signs up in the walls, finish faster, go further, faster. And so they take an additional class. No discussion with an advisor about, well, what would this look like in your life? What else are you carrying while going to a class? Not to mention, what I believe, and I've only come to this after writing the book, a real misread of the 12-credit student. The assumption was that they want to be more full-time, and they, for some reason, were lacking the right norms or values or whatever, right, the deficit model, to take an additional class. I think, and I actually put in a grant to study this at CUNY, that many of them, were 12 credits just so they can be eligible for the state financial aid. That they were really, if you want to use the word, reluctant full-timers. And that in their hearts, because they know what they can handle, were really part-time students. So here was this, again, this kind of top-down narrative of who our students are without really knowing much about them, imposing this kind of incentive model to try to get them to complete. So there's a co-optation of language, right, and of, a motivation that is so lacking in an understanding of who our students are. And so chapter 4, I developed this idea of the student sensibility because I wanted to share what I was learning semester after semester in my classrooms, in the advisement office, my advisement time with the students, of not just who they were, but how they thought of themselves as students, because that was really missing in so much of the analysis, right? They knew that college was important, they knew they had to go, but they didn't exactly know how, and they didn't have a lot of models, not too much to rely on in terms of family socialization. So we give them the software management, tell them, okay, you're a human service major, go ahead and register. And they would, their first semester, would register for a class at 8 in the morning and at 4 p.m. in the afternoon, because they've never done this before. They never had that agency before. And we just expected, much like the guided pathways, that they're just going to know this. And so I wanted to expose, without relying on the tired deficit lens through which we often view community college students, rather a very different kind of way of thinking about our community college students as hungry and thirsty and desiring to feel inspired and challenged, but want to be known and seen. And so many of the initiatives that I write about really disregard that part of them. So that's what I tried to bring out.
Can I add something really quick?
If you're super fast.
It's going to be super fast. I think one of the things that the accountability measures and austerity measures have done is that instead of us teaching students how to have choice and agency, we're taking away all choice and agency. And that is the root of it, right? And college should be teaching that. That's what and they can learn it, and they'll know it, and they're great at it. But they don't even have a choice to try now. It's very frustrating.
Any quick question? We can probably take one quick question on this section or comment from the audience, or we can move on to the next piece.
I have just 2 sentences,
Yeah.
and it's that there is not a single element of what you described in California that was not part of the design for our consolidation, and also initiated in 2017. And it's alarming how clearly this is all being written by the same folks, right?
Yeah, it's not a conspiracy, it's here.
Yeah.
Well, and also just, now I'm going to make a comment to bring it up. You said as well, though, it's sort of like all of this is done in the name of equity, but you're not actually centering the voices of the people that are in the school experiencing all the things that they experience, and it is not the same experience. Our students don't have the same experience as, frankly, the white dude in Sacramento who's making the laws about how to get through college and what the incentives and motivations and ability in terms of time and life are. Okay, we're going to move on to Christine and talk about the culture of care. Chapter 7, for those with the book.
And if you don't have the book, right, so there is so much in this chapter that I want to talk about, and I had to cut a lot out to stay within my 15 minutes, and now, based on the conversation, I'm going to switch the stuff that I was cutting out, so you really should read the book. So I'm going to start with just saying that I really truly believe in the completion agenda, right? 82% of our students come to college and in an associate's degree, community college, looking to earn a bachelor's degree, right? So they came for that. I think we mess it up for them on many, many different levels, but I think that we need to figure out how to support them. So Robin talks in this chapter about you cannot limit the understanding and solutions to student challenges solely to individual efforts, right? It has to be the entire institution, and it goes on to talk about how the institution can do that. But that community college students enter the college with a deep desire to feel validated and cared for, and that's where we mess up. Cuts to public funding hurt students. We now charge them higher tuition. It's the only way that we have funding then, and then we're offering less services to them. There's a quote on page 260 that is super, super important, right? So it talks about higher selective schools have higher graduation rates because selectivity is accompanied by higher investment per student. So Anthony Carnival quotes, the 468 most selective colleges spend anywhere from 2 to almost 5 times the amount per student. Higher spending in the most selective colleges leads to higher graduation rates, greater access to graduate and professional schools, and better economic outcomes in the labor market when you're comparing them to any white, African American, and Hispanic students who are equally qualified but attend less competitive schools. So that the only way to improve the educational attainment and completion of low-income racial and ethnic minority college students is to spend more on public higher education, especially for learning and instruction. These students should be offered an education that taps into and cultivates capabilities, and I love this sentence, rather than just giving them a credential on the cheap, right? It's not about the diploma, but what is that diploma worth for them? And so the chapter really talks about caring and how, as an institution, we have to care for the caregiving and the care receiving. And a caring relationship in an institution is, educational setting is realized when teachers understand and respond to the needs of the students, and when students acknowledge the response. And I think one of the issues is that so many faculty have gone to these selective higher education institutions and don't realize what our students need, right? And they base it based on their own experience. So then they go back to using the words of grit and things like that, which are not it. So can an institution actually be caring? And for community colleges to be caring institutions, the faculty and the staff and the administration who do the physical, mental, and emotional care work that is required to meet the needs of the students need to do so under conditions that respect the labor and the care as well. And so there's a lot of talk across the country about community colleges and this culture of care, loving your students, and examples that are usually given are about where faculty go above and beyond outside of the workday to go do something special for a student rather than the everyday, and how it's really important that we have to recognize the work of care and also giving that same care and respect to faculty and staff. And it's something that we've been working hard at QCC, because I truly believe that for us to give the best service for our students in the best institution, we all have to love being there and really feel respected, and that our work is respected so that we have that. Robin's quote, "Institutions are not caring when addressing the needs of one group falls on the backs of another group." One of the things that we talk about, right, so Robin gives a lot of examples about how bureaucracy gets in the way of student caring, right? So if they're a college now student and they, took a class as a high school student after college, that GPA sticks with them if they return to that college. They can go to any other CUNY school and they start out back with a clean slate, but we're hurting the students for remaining where they were, where they had a sense of belonging, where they felt the most committed. So one of the things that we do at QCC as we have these conversations is to, when we realize that we're not centering the right person in the conversation, to bring that up, right? So if we're talking about student success, are we centering the student in this conversation, right? If we're talking about faculty or staff, are we centering the employee, the colleague in the conversation rather than looking at it as an institution and looking at it through our policies? And really trying to figure out where our policies hurt our students so that we can make those changes for them. So Robin says that if we're really serious about the completion agenda, we need to confront the neighborhood inequality, going to what you shared, K-12 inequality, and invest in the people who are working at community colleges. Increasing the number of mental health counselors. We know our students stop out. The number one reason is for finances. The number two reason is because they have mental health challenges. Students' basic needs obviously have to be met before they can even learn. And advisement needs to be with people and not just tools, right? And it goes back to funding, right? We can afford the tool, we can't afford the people, but yet it is so important that you have that person. In a truly caring institution, the stories and lived realities of students it educates are respected, and the deepening of relationships and the strengthening of ties and belonging where possible are institutional priorities, as is the recognizing, validating, and compensating to the labor that makes that possible. Institutions must be arranged creatively to proactively reach out to students because they're not going to be the first ones to make the contact. One of the things that we had done at the college during the pandemic with students when we were first coming back, they had to upload their vaccine card or they were going to be dropped, is we asked faculty and staff during work hours when, who wants to be part of this calling campaign, and we had everybody in the same room, including the people that could help us troubleshoot the uploading, and we would call students personally, and if they picked up, they had their vaccine card, they just needed the help to do it, and we ended up saving hundreds of students that would have gotten dropped otherwise, but it's so important that we do that. Lots of students are reluctant to ask questions, mainly because of the invalidating way that they have been treated in prior institutions, and I think you were generous for that. I think we do it in our own institutions also. I am a broken record on this at work where, we might have heard that question from a student 100 times, but it's the first time that student asked it of us, and if we don't give a caring, helpful response, and, they'll never get to ask us another question again, and we probably aren't going to see them again. And the same thing, so, our tools that we're so proud of, right? So we have Starfish.
For now.
For now, for another couple of weeks. And, you know, we're talking about the tools, so, and we want to validate students. They're coming to us, they don't believe necessarily that they belong here and stuff, and within a couple of weeks, we have faculty raising flags and starfish to students left and right, telling me, right, you don't belong, right, you don't belong. Look, we're raising these flags, go see an advisor because you're struggling, you're not going to make it in my class. And, you know, we've pulled the data, and those students have stopped out, right? Like that, we did that to them, and how, you know, so we're going to do better when we have Navigate. So I was going to skip this section, but I think it's really important about federal work study, right? So it rewards the most expensive institutions. They get the most funding for federal work study. And we know, right, so students don't have to leave campus to have a job, right? Now that they don't have the transportation cost to have to go somewhere else. While they're on campus, they can now meet, you know, with a faculty member. They can go do homework in between work and classes. They feel more part of the college. They increase their sense of belonging and identity as a community college student. And it also helps us, right, because it's alleviating our understaffing. We in CUNY are in a hiring freeze. So I decided, we decided that we're going to have our cafeteria start delivering food to the different offices and stuff as a way to help with the whole caring for our faculty and staff. And I said it would be great if we could do our federal work study students could be the ones to deliver the food because they'll be getting paid for it, they're on campus, they have jobs, they'll get to know our entire campus, offices they've never seen before, the people that are there so that if they have a problem they can go. But it turns out you cannot deliver food as a federal work study student, right? So bureaucracy. So, you know, again, trying to, we have to stop trying to turn our non-traditional college students into traditional college students, right? They are non-traditional. That is why they are with us. And how do we redesign the community college to serve the needs of the students who we are serving? We know that students' family obligations, right? Robin says they should not be rendered invisible. 79% of the students at QCC, I'd say that they take care of a family member, whether it's their own child, a sibling, a parent. We have to create better supports for our part-time students. That's the majority of all of our students, right? They come into us full-time in their first semester as freshmen because we tell them this is what you should do, right? And then by the end of the first year, most of them are part-time. How do we support them? And this I love because I'm trying to figure this out, right? How do you restructure the length of semesters? We have 16 weeks. We know students stop out because life gets in the way. If life gets in the way of week 4 or 5 of a 16-week semester, what happens? The student stops out because it's just too complicated. If they're in an 8-week semester and life gets in the way at week 4 or 5, they may hang on and earn credits, right? They might have to take off the next semester, but it's 8 weeks, and then they can come back when life gets settled. But how do we help them get those credits? And again, there were a number of quotes in your book, right? So care needs to be given inside the classroom, unconstrained by cost cutting and bean counting, right? You know, as the bean counter, right, on the campus, it's hard, but it's about the federal and city and state dollars that really needs to support our students. CUNY did a study in 2019 of the impact on the state of all of the graduates within CUNY as a whole system and showed that we give the state $4.2 billion in state income taxes. That money needs to come back to the colleges to support the students so that we can continually do that. You know, so a number of comments about faculty, you know, and one of the things you talk about is being, you know, we always talk about like we have to get the buy-in of faculty, right? And you use the term you have to bring them in, right? I just recently heard a phrase that I've started using, right? It's about the co-creation of the work together, right? Like how do we co-create? Faculty have a unique perspective of what the students' needs are and have to be part of the conversations with the advisors and stuff in order to make that happen. And so, the book ends with, you wrote this in the middle of COVID and edited, right? We are still feeling the impact of COVID. We do not know still if all of the students that haven't returned to school, is it still because of COVID? Because they are now supporting family members, families, because family members have passed away. The educational philanthropic striving policy. I'm trying to create an LGBTQ plus resource center for students, a space where they can go all the time to have a sense of safety, security, community, sense of belonging. Submitted a proposal to a well-known philanthropist and was told that because I don't have retention and graduation data as a baseline and have no way to measure that to show the impact, they will not fund me. It's dead in the water. And I'm like, but I'm trying to create a safe space. I don't want students to have to self-identify and then tell them that I'm going to be tracking their academic progress, because it defeats the purpose of creating that safe space. But this is the life, the world that we live in. And so, Robin ends the book with a question, right? Who should the community colleges serve and how, right? So I leave that to you.
That's a great segue for our last bit. I don't know if there are any comments or questions. Robin, do you want to?
Yeah.
We only have 15 minutes.
All right,
so
I'll be really quick. But, if there's a way to clone you and put you in lots of other places in the community college landscape, it would, I think, turn things around. One of the things, the reason why I chose to talk about care was before I studied higher ed, that was sort of my jam. Like I was deeply engrossed in the feminist theories about care and the care ethic. And what I found so interesting as I was doing the research for this book was that this language of care was being used to sell this skeletal, devalued education in the name of equity. And so I was drawing on this idea that, it's kind of like putting lipstick on a pig. It's this emotional branding, right? And just like how can you be against completion? I mean, I was scared to title this because I didn't want there to be an impression that I was against completion. I am not at all opposed to completion. It's just how do we get there and how do we support students? And what I was finding in this culture of care, even in my own campus, was that there was no concern for how, the only concern purportedly was students, and that was a really surface concern, and there was absolutely no concern for the people who labor there. And that is a deformed notion of this kind of care that I was trying to push back on. That example of the grant is just, I think, so telling of what I tried to say was that, that they don't necessarily, get in the way of the research that we do, but they do absolutely form and narrow the agenda of what's studied and what's funded, and that's a problem. Back to 2017 really quickly. So I was at the time my president's convocation or whatever it was, and she had these glossy diagrams of a 5-year period, 2012 to 2017, where our completion rates, our graduation rates really increased. And the next slide was how, almost at this very same rate, our rate of students on academic probation also increased, almost in sync. And I stood there and was like, I was waiting for the correlation, explanation, and there was none. And so I didn't want to be a jerk, and so after the performance, I went up to her and I said, thank you for that, that's really helpful. So do you think that there's a relationship, or what do you think of the relationship between the two? And she had absolutely no response. It was as if it never occurred to her to think that there may be a relationship between getting some people across the finish line and some people really falling even further behind. And that was instructive to me about the lack of real concern and real care. A lot of what I'm thinking now in the 2 years that the book has been published is how we can create communities in the community college around joy. I think we need to bring joy sort of back into this idea of learning. I went back to teaching in person as soon as I could in COVID because I hated the Zoom thing. And I remember hearing laughter for the first time. Like I had my students working on something and there was laughter and I like stopped for a moment and I stopped them because I'm like, you're laughing. What's going on? And like, it was so resonating to me and so important that I think if we are going to care about this process and if we're going to push back mightily, we should do so with force, but also to allow the joy to come into our classrooms, into our hallways, into our negotiations, into the state houses, because I think that is ultimately how learning and transformation happens. So, thank you.
Yeah, question in the back.
I don't know if the question is or statement. My name is Dwayne Schaefer, and I'm from Long Beach City College, as I said, in Long Beach, California. Eloy Oakley, who Wendy talks so fondly of, was the president at my college when I was a union president. And so needless to say, we had wonderful chats, and we were on different sides of the coin. Before he left us to go to the chancellor's office, he tried a lot of these things at our campus, looking at students' work, particularly in math, at our high schools. If they took a consumer math class, they should be able to take a statistics course, which I don't know where the correlation came from. The data that was used was really twisted at best to substantiate that by putting students into college level reading, math and writing courses, that they were going to succeed. They were going to rise to the top like cream and following the fastest rabbit in the room, which was a lie. Many of the students either stopped going to class and received an F, which was on their record, academic record for the rest of their days, and if they decided to come back, they would have that grade as well as other grades to incorporate into their GPA. He was questioned, and the book that he used for this that had the whole schema written out was the Reimagining of
Redesigning America's Community College.
Yes,
Yeah.
which is
The
the
Bibles.
University of Texas
Yep.
is where it came from, because they have a study or a
Yep.
pod or whatever you want to call it, incubator of all kind of crazy, excuse my language, ass ideas that they want to push forward. So very, very interesting. And a comment on starfish. My daughter went to ASU, Arizona State University, and they have this system where as you look into your academics, they'll tell you green light means you're on track to graduate, because they guarantee your students are going to graduate in 4 years, which I was excited about, because that means my debt's going to be a little bit lower. But the other part was if you weren't, it goes to a red light. And so we took this little system in and we started looking at it in Long Beach, and we said, let's do this. And so we put it together where if you had a red light, it was a message to say, come and see a counselor so we can help you get off of academic probation, whatever the case may be. Or if it was a yellow light, you're getting very close to some type of probation and you want to come and talk to a counselor so that we can develop a plan of action. And if you're on a green light, you go forward. Well, the president at the time, a different president than Eloy Oakley, didn't like it. But we rolled that out. When I say we, I'm talking about our counseling department, rolled that out in a big formation, and the students loved it. It really helped them understand, because like you said, with starfish, you got all these, you're messing up, you need to leave, you need to do this, but there was nothing to say what you need to do. And as a counselor going through my grad program, there's this, the theorist Tinto talks about students making that connection to their institution and feeling like I belong here and I'm going to do the best that I can to get through here. The data is great, don't get me wrong, in talking about how all this happens. It's the qualitative pieces that is always missing. And as a counselor, you get all that qualitative piece because they'll tell you the life stories, what's happening, why they're not going. And I always encourage students, if life is happening and you need to stop out, this place is not for sale, so we'll be here when you come back, as well as your academic record. So do what you need to do to take care of life. And that was really resonating to them because they thought they had to. They thought they had to take those 15 units because we had that message too. Take this 3 more units and you can get through faster and stuff. And Eloy's whole bent on this was about students completing in 6 years at a community college or a 2-year school. And I kept telling students, get rid of that 2-year moniker and just complete in your time. Because it doesn't, you know, it took me 7 years in a 4-year school, mainly because I partied. But nonetheless, my degree says I have a degree. So it took me 7 years, who cares? So those kind of things, and you know, people look at 4-year, 2-year, transfer, no transfer, whatever, It's really listening to the student, and it's individualized. It's not one size fit all. It's a place that you can do a variety of things, start here and go anywhere, but we have to listen to the student. The student is the client, but we have to help them navigate this thing called a college.
Do you have a quick response, and then
There's someone else.
Okay.
And if we have time,
I am the young CEO. I'm an agent in Lagodia Community College, and also privileged to the working with the Robin and BMCC. So after effect of COVID, enrollment just plummeting. The Lagodia, we have about 30% the drop. And I don't know how you do, the President Mangino, except, your community college. Rest is just, the swimming through. Same time in BMCC, the spike of, the class size. And that's my comment. But, my real question, I'm a member of, the CUNY contract negotiation team. As a community college, the officer, I'm the office at large, but representing community college as well as the part-timer. So I guess all of you, one way or another, associate with the community college, right? And I need your advice. We have 25 the campuses, and our brethren or sisterhood. I have to fight against them. The four-year institution literally suck out, our student, from the community college. We only have, the 7 community colleges under the CUNY system. And also, how to fight for the, the welfare of part-time. So Connecticut, California, anywhere else, if you able to give me some advice, how I can get the better the contract, which why we are here for. I'm all ears. That's my the general question.
I think that last chapter about caring, it's funny because I was listening to you talk about the students, but what resonated with me so much in that last chapter is that we can't be caring for students if we're not caring for everybody on campus, right? And I know that, I think it was the chapter before, talking about students, they would go to registration, and registration sort of short and rude to them, and students get upset. But in California, we have contingent faculty sleeping in their car and on food stamps. And then somehow we think they're the ones that are going to raise our students out of poverty. So I think that it has to be a collective action. And in the end, all of this is not going to get fixed without starting to change the funding of our community colleges. And it's not just community colleges, it's healthcare, it's our power grid, it's our protective services, it's all across the board. We have this austerity measures, and neoliberalism has completely defunded all services that we need. And that has to change. We have to start investing in ourselves and our public services if we want it to change overall. And so contingent faculty is sort of how we balance the budget of community colleges on the backs of contingent faculty, and we've reached a breaking point. And so hopefully we can turn it around.
Happy to talk later too, and direct you to a Higher Education Labor United forum coming up next week on that topic. But I just want to get back to the culture of care, which I think is something that, in the same way, whether it's the increased class sizes that are structural obstacles to the capacity to care, or adjunct faculty who are not compensated for going over and above. They are not. And to continually sort of violate that kind of labor restriction is ridiculous, though they do and love to. Let me give you a quick example of the ways that you can have a real structural obstacle to care. So, you talked about the high-tech, high-touch kind of model, right? So we did too. We were going to hire 174 guided pathways advisors. We actually got to a little bit over 150 before we stopped, but we hired them all on soft ARPA money, right? The COVID money that was going to run out in 2024. And the model was this: it's fine that the money's going to run out in 2024, 2025, because here's what they're going to do. They're going to pay for themselves by convincing each student on average to take 1 extra credit.
Wow.
So they were tasked with funding their own salaries by advising students against their own interests. Now, who did we hire? We hired people who care deeply about student success, who know better than anyone, who talk about the conditions of their students' lives directly with them and see the consequences of this. They are devastated by this, and they're not going to do it. And we are, you know, but to put people in a position where now our system has a $130 million deficit, and they know their jobs are on the line, and they are literally being told that the model always was that you will pay for your own salaries by pushing these students to do something that is terrible for them. Mm-hmm. So, you know, these are the kinds of things that we are facing, and it happens all over. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's just one.
Okay, we're at time. So I just, really quickly, the book is being sold out at the table out there, and I encourage you all to have a book club with faculty and administrators and staff, and really engage in the topics here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for our